This lecture is going to focus on photosynthesis. So the learning objective covered here, you identify the basic steps in aerobic, anaerobic, and photosynthetic or photosynthesis reactions. So we already talked about aerobic and anaerobic, and now this is going to focus on photosynthesis. All life on Earth depends on solar energy. So photosynthetic organisms are organisms that can use solar energy in order to create their own food. They're also known as autotrophs. Auto means self, troph, think about a food trough. So troph is talking about eating. They're able to make their own carbon source, their own food. Photosynthesis is a process that captures solar energy, transforms the solar energy into chemical energy, and then that energy ends up stored in a carbohydrate or a sugar. Photosynthesizers produce food energy. They feed themselves as well as heterotrophs. So heterotrophs are organisms that eat other organisms in order to survive. So an autotroph is going to make their own food, but then they also provide a food source for the heterotrophs. Some of the different regions that you'd find inside of a plant cell, we kind of went through some of those basic organelles, but the chloroplast is the photosynthetic center of a cell. And chloroplasts are found in both plants and algae. And there's a few different parts to the chloroplast. The thylakoid disc. Thylakoid disc is kind of the stacks of pancakes. They look like each individual thylakoid disc is one of those individual pancakes that's stacked up inside of there. The grana is the actual stacks, so they're all stacked up. And then the stroma is the fluid or semi-fluid that surrounds and fills up the rest of the chloroplast. So if we look at the typical leaf, inside of a chloroplast you can see each one of these structures is a thylakoid disc, and they're stacked in grana, and then stroma is this fluid that fills up the chloroplast. Pigments and photosystems, so chemicals that absorb certain wavelengths of light, are considered pigments. Wavelengths that are not absorbed by pigments are reflected or transmitted. If we look at the absorption spectrum, pigments found in chlorophyll absorb various portions of visible light. An absorption spectrum is a graph showing relative absorption of the various colors of the rainbow. Chlorophyll is green because it absorbs much of the reds and blues of white light, and it reflects away green, so that's why we perceive it as green. Carotenoids are accessory pigments which absorb light in the violet, blue, green range and reflect yellow and orange. You'd see carotenoids in carrots. So this is the spectrum of light, and here you can see visible light and the different wavelengths. So plants are going to absorb wavelengths at this end of the spectrum, and they reflect green, while carotenoids are going to absorb the pigments at this end of the spectrum and those wavelengths, and they're going to reflect orange. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the light reactions that happen. So let me pull up another slide here so that we can do some drawings. Okay, so let's do yellow for the sun. So we have sun up in the sky, and the sun is going to emit all of these rays of light. Now we have a thylakoid disc, and on this thylakoid disc there's various regions. Sunlight is first going to hit photosystem 2. And when it hits photosystem 2, it's going to excite an electron. An electron I'm going to abbreviate E negative. So the energy from the sun is enough to excite away an electron from the membrane. When that electron is excited away, it's going to bounce around between all of these different subunits and eventually be captured to be used in creating NADPH, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But in order to replace this electron here, we have to have another electron come in. The place that we get that electron from is water. So we actually split water, releasing hydrogen ions plus electrons plus oxygen. Oxygen is given off by the plant as a waste product, and this is where a majority of our atmospheric oxygen comes from, the waste product of the splitting of water during photosynthesis. So now this electron is going to pass through the different components of the light-dependent reactions. But it can't just do this on its own. It needs a shuttle bus. So it's going to get in the first shuttle bus, which kind of has a weird name. It's known as plastoquinone. And plastoquinone is going to deliver this electron to the next region along the way, which is called cytochrome. Now from here, the electron again gets excited and jumps up. But this time, it's carried by a different transporter, plastocyanin. And it's transported to photosystem 1. So if you notice, photosystem 2 comes first. They were named in the order in which they were discovered, not in the order in which they operate. Now, photosystem 1 actually requires more light. So another photon of light from the sun is going to hit photosystem 1, and that is going to excite the electron again. And this time, that electron is transported by ferredoxin to an enzyme known as ferredoxin reductase, which is away from the thylakoid membrane. And what ferredoxin reductase is going to do is it's going to take NADP, and it's going to add that hydrogen, the hydrogens that we'll talk about in just a little bit, and combine it with the electrons to make NADPH. And NADPH is one of the major byproducts or end products of photosynthesis. So if we look down here again, we notice that the electrons were used here to replace the electrons from the photosystem. The oxygen was released as a waste product, but now we have an accumulation of these hydrogen ions. So hydrogen ions are going to start to build up inside here. And just like how we handled hydrogen ions building up in cellular respiration, these hydrogen ions are going to travel through this ATP synthase, which I'll abbreviate ATPase. As the hydrogens flow through, they cause this to rotate, and these hydrogens can then be accepted up here. So this thing starts rotating, and as it rotates, it's going to create ATP. So we do ADP plus a phosphate to give us ATP. And ATP is the second end product of the light-dependent reactions. Let's use a different example here because all of this looks really confusing. Let's say you get a phone call from a friend and your friend says, "Hey, I'm going to pick you up and we're going to take a party bus." If you've ever been on a party bus before, basically it's a bus and you get on there with a group of friends and they transport you from bar to bar or nightclub to nightclub, and you can go have fun, and then don't worry about, drinking and driving because there's a bus driver. So always drink responsibly and all that kind of good stuff. But if you think about it, the sun excites an electron. So you get a phone call from your friend and you're like, hey, I'm leaving. So you leave. But let's say in your house you had a role to play. So you were the one that was supposed to do the laundry that day. Well, let's call our little brother or little sister in order to do our laundry for us. So we split water, and then this electron takes the place. So now this photosystem 2 is happy again, and this will be functioning properly again. So you get on the first shuttle bus, and the first shuttle bus is called plastoquinone. And plastoquinone delivers you to this bar called cytochrome. In cytochrome, you're going to dance and get all, have fun. And in this place, you're going to lose energy. You're going to become a little bit more tired. So when you leave cytochrome, you have a little bit less energy. So now you get into the next bus. And this shuttle bus is called plastocyanin. And plastocyanin is going to deliver you to the next bar called photosystem 1. In photosystem 1, you're really exhausted. So you actually need another boost of energy in order to be excited to leave. Well, now ferredoxin picks you up, and ferredoxin says, hey, we're going to go to Taco Bell and give you some tacos because, tacos are kind of good to have after a night that you've just had. So you go up to Taco Bell over here, which is off the strip. This is a strip of bars here. We go away from that main strip, and now we're at ferredoxin reductase, also known as Taco Bell. So we're going to combine these electrons with some of the hydrogens that have flowed through here to create NADPH. And then these hydrogens that flow through are going to, like I said, combine with here, but they're going to cause a rotation of this ATPase, and that's going to allow you to make energy. With the light-independent reactions, so we did our light-dependent reactions already, we're bringing in ATP and NADPH from those light-dependent reactions. An enzyme in the stroma, known as rubisco, is going to take those and atmospheric carbon dioxide, and it's going to combine it with some water and end up making G3P. G3P is a sugar precursor, which eventually can be converted to glucose. This process is known as the Calvin cycle. Amazingly, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are exact opposites from each other. In cellular respiration, we start with a sugar and we add some oxygen in there. We end up releasing carbon dioxide and water as an end product. In photosynthesis, we're starting with carbon dioxide and water, and then we're creating glucose and oxygen as an end product. So they are almost exact reverse copies. So what does G3P end up doing in the cell? Well, G3P can either be converted to glucose phosphate, fructose phosphate, and then sucrose. Or from the glucose phosphate, it can be converted to starch or cellulose. It can also be converted to fatty acids. So any of the plant oils, they can be stored as fatty acids. And amino acids. So those are going to make up proteins for the plant cell.